now are Daniel Levy, president of the U.S. Middle East Project, and Aaron David Miller, senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Gentlemen, it's great to have both of you with us. Daniel, I'll start with you. And we've been saying this word now for several days, imminent. You just saw my colleague there saying it, but I juxtapose that with what is happening beyond Israel's borders, the release of 2 American hostages, the delivery of not enough aid, but nonetheless aid into Gaza today, and this Cairo Peace Summit. Is there any reason to believe that maybe something is happening behind the scenes, not so transparently, that can perhaps delay this?
Well, I think one also should not be overly focused on whether or not there will be a ground invasion, because, we just saw the heartbreaking scenes of that Palestinian family in Gaza on top of the heartbreaking scenes of what happened on October 7th. But already every day there is this terrible loss and destruction now in Gaza, and that's going on without a ground invasion. In fact, a ground invasion may well complicate Israel's military mission and lead to Israeli losses. Where I think the ground invasion really matters is, could that have the impact of a broader escalation, not only in the Palestinian arena, in the West Bank, where over 80 Palestinians killed, more than 1,000 arrested, in East Jerusalem, maybe inside Israel itself, but also more regionally, with perhaps something happening with Hezbollah. So it's important to keep one's eyes on that, but not to lose focus on what's happening already. Yes, aid trucks went in, but that was just over 20. Normally there would be 850 a day. It's only 2.5% of the needs of Gazans. And this interesting release of 2 Americans being held in Gaza last night, I think that has impacted the calculation, impacted the Israeli room for maneuver, because it shows that there is an opportunity to get these people out, and it's starting a little to shift the public dynamic inside Israel. So there's something to work with here. There's something to work with on the humanitarian, the prisoner release, but we've got to dial this down and get a ceasefire.
And it's a really interesting point that you talk about the pressure that is building up, because, Aaron, I think you know this better than others on the diplomatic front when it comes to the United States. And I wanted to share with you some of this reporting from Axios, that President Biden is taking this dual approach, if you will, to the Gaza crisis. Publicly, he is standing strongly and firmly behind Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's embraced him in every sense of the word and what Israel's doing. In public, or rather, in private, though, it seems, according to this reporting, he is signaling a more constrained approach. At least that's what the reporting suggests. And I want to get your thoughts. A, is that the right approach to try to do that with Israel, or should there be more a forceful public approach from the U.S. to restrain Israel, given what we're seeing play out over the past 2 weeks?
I mean, the frame that the president said initially in his October 10th speech seemed to convey the unmistakable message that he was prepared, the administration was prepared to give the Israelis the time, the space, the support to do what they needed to do in Gaza. That's still very, very uncertain at this point. Since that time, in the last 10 days or so, I think the messaging from Washington, both with respect to adherence to international humanitarian law, distinction, proportionality, avoidance of civilian casualties, he's added that to the public frame. And I also believe, if the reporting is to be believed, and I suspect it is, that the president is urging restraint, caution, and perhaps, if the reports tonight are to be believed, delay in the imminence of that ground campaign. I think in part it's to test the proposition that, in fact, there may be additional time to negotiate for or to release hostages. But let's be clear, Hamas is playing a very cruel game here. They're under tremendous pressure. Qataris, as you know, host Hamas's external leadership in Doha. They've subsidized, with Israeli acquiescence for the last several years, anywhere from between $3 to $10 million a month to keep calm and keep stability in Gaza. So when Doha speaks, Hamas at least has to take that into account. So I think Hamas is under pressure to change the frame of their image following this savage and brutal 24 hours following October 7th. But I also think that they're playing, dribbling out hostages, perhaps, in order to buy time. And in some respects, psychological warfare. You know, the issue of separating the Americans from the Israelis is reminiscent in the minds of many Israelis of what happened in Entebbe when the PFLP and German radicals separated the Jews and Israelis from the other foreign nationals on that Air France flight. So I think it's pressure and propaganda. Whether it's going to pay any real dividends, to me is unclear.
Let me, just because President Biden invoked both Ukraine and Israel in his primetime speech this country, I want to take a moment just to play for you a soundbite from the president of the European Commission regarding the Ukraine-Russia war. Take a listen to this.
Targeted attacks on civilian infrastructure with a clear aim to cut off men, women, children of water, electricity and heating. With the winter coming, these are acts of pure terror, and we have to call it as such.
Aaron, I'll start with you on this. Is it difficult for the world to listen to the Europeans and Americans trying to galvanize support for Israel when you've had such a forceful condemnation about that, but when Israel does it towards the Palestinians, it's crickets on that front, 2 weeks on, nothing as forceful as that statement?
You know, the frame of, look, let's be clear, we have a special relationship with the state of Israel. We make allowances, excuses, justifications on any number of issues when it comes to the Israelis. I don't buy I understand the power and the logic of Ukraine versus Russian occupation of Ukraine, Israeli occupation of the West Bank. I just don't buy the logic here. Russian aggression against Ukraine is willful, it's intentional, it's aggrandizement. It's willful killing, purposeful killing of civilians, taking hundreds of children, kidnapping them, taking them hostage, bringing them back to Russia. Genocide has been used as well, and I'm sure from the Ukrainian perspective, the idea of stifling and staunching Ukraine as a coherent polity is a cultural genocide in many respects. You may not like it, or maybe you do, that the Israelis have been a close ally of the United States for a long time. U.S. and Israeli interests do not coincide these days on many interests. And the value proposition that has united Israel and the United States is also, as a consequence of the Netanyahu government's efforts to essentially erode and undermine Israeli democracy in Israel. I understand the problems of the occupation, the contradictions that pose, but I'm not sure there's much to compare. Certainly in this case, Hamas launches a savage, brutal attack, borrowing a page out of the Islamic State, indiscriminate killing, torture, rape, willful taking of hostages, both dead and alive, I might add, in order to trade them for Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. There are many contradictions in our support for the state of Israel, many anomalies, and perhaps a lot of hypocrisy. But on this particular issue, I don't see the comparison.
Daniel, I want to give you a chance to respond to that and how that impacts the reaction from the Arab world, because on one hand, the Arab world has looked to the way the United States has galvanized support for Ukraine. And this has become, I would argue, just based on this last week, a touch point between the global north and the global south that is playing out in this conflict.
Well, I think it is important that this isn't just about the Arab world, as you've said. Now, no two situations are identical, but when people look at Israel's systematic violation of international law and international humanitarian law, which didn't begin as a response to something horrendous that happened on October 7th, it's not just the crimes being committed against the civilian population in Gaza. It's not good enough to say anything that happens to Palestinians in Gaza happens because of what Hamas did. No, these are Israeli bombs. It's Israel that's closed off the supplies of water, fuel, food, electricity. But it's what preceded that, the decades and decades of occupation of Palestinians living without rights, living under an occupation that itself violates international law, the illegal settler population, no equality. So here we have a situation, and the world looks at this. And it'd be important to listen to those speeches that were given in Cairo today, and the cost to America. when America's ally, someone who's seen as very credible in America, in Israel, the King of Jordan, says you applied one standard of immediate, unequivocal accountability in one situation, referring to Ukraine quite clearly, and not in this situation. Everyone should go and listen to the speech of the Jordanian king when America has to deploy its veto, chooses to deploy its veto at the UN Security Council. I think the rest of the world has been listening to an America that's been wrapped in this kind of self-righteous narrative of rules-based order for the last year and a half on that podium. And they see America today, and it reaffirms the suspicions that they had all along. So I think this is costly to America, and I just hope we don't return to ignoring those root causes, because anyone who believes that you can militarily crush a people and live in security is not doing a service to Israel and, of course, not to the Palestinians.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that speech that took place in Cairo today. Daniel Levy, Aaron, David Miller, thank you, gentlemen, to the both of you. Greatly appreciate it.